Diagnostic Instruments for Autism in Deaf Children study, DIADS. The study started in October 2013. It looked at 3 different autism assessments for children and young people. We wanted to adapt these assessments to make sure they were accessible and accurate for deaf children and young people who may have autism. The study finished in December 2019. The 3 autism assessments that were modified are SRS-2, the Social Responsiveness Scale, 2nd edition. A screening questionnaire. ADOS-2, the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, 2nd edition. A play and interaction-based assessment. ADIR, the Autism Diagnostic Interview Revised. An interview with parents by a clinician. SRS-2 is a screening questionnaire for parents and carers to complete about their child's behaviour, looking back over the previous 6 months. ADOS-2 is where the clinician leads an interactive, play-based assessment with the child or young person. ADIR is a semi-structured interview where the clinician asks parents or carers for in-depth information about their child's development since birth.
Autism spectrum conditions or autism spectrum disorders are where a person's brain develops differently and they see or experience the world in a different way. So they may have some strengths or some challenges. The challenges include challenges with communication or social interaction or understanding the feelings of other people, and sometimes they have lots of repetitive behaviours. The challenges include communication and social interaction and empathising, and the strengths may include things like good skills in mathematics or very good memory or other things. Historically, there have been problems with misdiagnosis of autism in deaf children. And this is because children with autism may have problems with communication, social interaction, and empathy. But deaf children who have early life language deprivation also have problems with communication, social interaction, and empathy problems. But of course, children who are deaf and have had language deprivation and therefore haven't had the ability to learn some of those communication and social interactional skills may be misdiagnosed as autism, which is a bit of a catastrophe if they end up in the wrong educational stream, for example. And what these new assessment instruments do is they take all that into account and really make sure that we ask very careful and close questions about language and social interaction and communication and make sure that we don't make these mistakes.
The first part of the study was called the Delphi Consensus, which involved experts all coming to an agreement. We invited experts from around the world who had worked with deaf children with autism and those who had lived experience. They looked at the questions within the 3 assessments: SRS2, ADOS2, and ADIR. Based on their expertise, they looked at one or more of these assessments. They fed back about any aspects which they felt were not suitable or needed modifications or additions. We took this feedback on board when making modifications. We now had adapted assessments and wanted to see if these could tell whether a deaf child had autism or not. These modified autism assessments then needed trialling to see if they could identify deaf children and young people with autism, and also deaf children and young people without autism. We recruited participants from across England. The main aim of this was to make sure these modified assessments were accurate. We did this by having the 3 assessments, SRS2, ADOS2 and ADIR, tested by a clinician with expertise and experience of working with deaf children with autism. They used these assessments, whilst a different clinician did a comprehensive autism assessment. The results from each clinician were compared. The aim was for the 2 sets of assessments to correlate. If they correlated, that meant these trialled assessments were accurate. The results of these gave us information about how well we could identify if a deaf child or young person had autism, or if a deaf child or young person did not have autism. The results for ADIR, deaf adaptation. It could identify deaf children and young people with autism at an accuracy of 89%. It could identify deaf children and young people without autism at an accuracy of 81%. The results for ADOS2, deaf adaptation. It could identify deaf children and young people with autism at an accuracy of 73%. It could identify deaf children and young people without autism at an accuracy of 71%. The results for SRS2, deaf adaptation. It could identify deaf children and young people with autism at an accuracy of 82%. It could identify deaf children and young people without autism at an accuracy of 67%. These results show that the 3 adapted assessments are proven to be a very useful measure to assess and identify if deaf children and young people have autism, or if deaf children and young people do not have autism. These adapted assessments are appropriate for assessing deaf children and young people with suspected autism. These can be used together to greatly improve assessments in deaf children. These assessments are available from WPS, Western Psychological Services.